Isekai translates to other world in Japanese, as in, you'd have to be from another world to not be tired of these shows. There are several types of isekai, but we all know the formula I'm talking about. The loser to winner story, where some nobody gets sucked into a magic portal and gains the McGuffin power and gets to be a Mary Sue for a season. Or 12. This type of isekai has been the center of a bit of controversy over the years, specifically during its peak. By now, the genre has more or less retreated from its insane dominance, but now, like the aftermath of a college rager, bottles and trash everywhere, we're left with one question. Why? If you were into anime at all through the 2010s, then you know this genre very, very well. Re:Zero, Konosuba, No Game No Life, SAO, and so many others. These shows can generally be referred to as isekai for boys.
But Ryan, girls can watch these shows too.
I know. Just walk with me for a second. When we look at isekai from the pre-2010s, what are the main differences from today? What are the big differences between Spirited Away, Inuyasha, Escaflowne, and say, these shows? Well, for one, the main characters are all girls. And that's not to say that there aren't any isekais pre-2010 with male leads, but compared to the last decade, it's pretty clear the distribution of main character genders has shifted. Now, why is that important? What I would argue is that this shift in MC gender has a lot more to do with a larger shift within the isekai genre itself. It's not that animation studios suddenly all decided to start catering to men at the same time, but more so that the male lead plays into the function of the modern isekai. In short, old isekais are about the world. New isekais are about the viewer. Take Spirited Away, for instance. Sin is mistakenly sent to a very unfamiliar place and is immediately faced with a terrifying situation. Her parents are gone, she doesn't understand the world, and it's filled with strange creatures. She doesn't have any superpowers or grand personal motivations. The goal is to get her parents back, and get back to her old life. And the plot ultimately concludes with her returning to that old life, having gone through an adventure in this strange world. Or what would generally be called a hero's journey. Now compare this to, say, Re:Zero. Subaru is dumped into this new world, and within the first 5 episodes, he realizes that he has Groundhog Day powers and is effectively immortal. It's also at this point I would emphasize that the light novel is not even close to finishing. It's hard to tell if Subaru is even trying to get back to the old world. The escapism is the point. Or in other words, this kind of isekai stops the hero's journey right about here. And I won't belabor the point by going through dozens and dozens of examples, but just think about the isekais you've watched over the last few years and tell me, was the goal ever really to get back to the old world? I know ostensibly that's the goal, but if a portal to the old world opened behind the MC, why would they ever take it? The connecting vein between all of these isekais is this. In the early 2010s, there was a shift in what the narrative goal of an isekai was. And this shift brought a huge economic boon, not only to the genre itself, but to anime more broadly. It became more about indulging the viewer, by projecting a mediocre everyman into a world where they could be the savior or the chosen one, and then just ruminating in it. Today's isekais are built to appease the audience. And to draw a maybe dramatic metaphor, today's isekai are like neat propaganda. It exists to flatter the person watching it with how awesome and great they'd be if only the world was a little different, or if they were gifted a second chance. And I don't think it's a coincidence that you see a shift in the main characters of these stories towards young, out-of-luck men. If you tried, you could draw a lot of lines between the societal conditions of males in the current year to this shift in focus of isekai. In fact, other, more important people already have. Alright, everybody, thinking hats on. About to do some big brain shit in here. Curtis Liu and Fatuma Muhammad both wrote their master's capstones on this exact topic. I should also point out the fact that 2 graduate students at 2 different universities and 2 different majors wrote their capstones on the same topic, so this should give some credence to the idea that this is a real thing and not just the voices in my head again. In Muhammad's paper, he ties the rise of these isekais to the distinctly Japanese experience of the disaffected Japanese youth. That is, in post-boom Japan, there's a class of people who have been unable to succeed in the traditional sense. And the theory goes this is reflected in the mangaka who write the light novels that these animes are based on, as well as the animes that succeed from that. Which makes sense. You see similar trends in music popularity decade to decade, reflecting the anxieties of the generation making and consuming it. Liu more or less agrees with this conclusion, saying that this development in isekais reflects a distinctly Japanese perspective. He goes as far as to say that certain themes and characters contribute to a cultural malaise in Japan, including the growth in suicide rates and shut-ins. Both of these works are undermined by one simple fact, though. Japan isn't the only market for anime. This is the 2021 AJA report on the trends in the animation market. The most important thing here are these little salmon-colored boxes. Those represent the share of the animation industry coming from overseas. You'll notice that in the last two columns, it's more than half of the revenues of the entire market. You should also notice that over the course of the Isekai decade, the foreign market didn't only grow, but grew exponentially. So with this information, we can wax poetic about the distinctly Japanese insights that Isekai provides, but there's a reason that Isekai exploded domestically and overseas, and say, Bunraku didn't. Its appeal isn't specifically Japanese. No, a far more fulfilling explanation of these two trends is the universal appeal of the fantasy that Isekai provides. I think Muhammad and Liu are both on the trail to truth, but the fundamental oversight, implied in Liu's and directly stated in Muhammad's, is the assumption that the draw of Isekai is in some way Japanese in nature. I don't think it's a coincidence the generation who blew up Isekai is also the one that suffers from the greatest incidence of mental health issues, and who, for the first time, are looking at a bleaker economic future than their parents, or who are experiencing some of the most polarized politics in a generation are also the people who are looking for some kind of escape in their entertainment. Oh, and I know that I'm American, and most of the people that watch this channel are American, but it's not just in America. So it may be the case that the characters in these stories speak Japanese, but the stories speak English and Spanish and Portuguese, German, Russian, Korean. The appeal of any kind of media is defined by the generation that creates and consumes it. Nirvana would not have done well in the 50s, and the Beatles would never make it in the 90s. Isekai, and by extension anime, went so global over that period of time because it was providing what that audience was looking for: an escape, another world. There is some sunlight, though. Isekai has been slowly losing its grip on the anime world, and that could reflect some development, some growth maybe, beyond this generational malaise. Or maybe the formula is just getting old, I don't know, I'm not a scientist. Well, that got a bit heavier than I anticipated. Before you go walking down some rainy street listening to lo-fi, check out my boy Alex for something lighter. He's been blowing up over the last few weeks and he deserves it, he makes good stuff. I can't confirm whether he's Scamboli's son or not, but I've got a working theory. Until next time.